Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you.
The record.
Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Whether you're here in the Cayman Islands or whether you're listening to us overseas via the web. For the Record, of course, is a show produced by Radio Cayman's management and staff specifically for you, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, also known as OC, and you can join me on For the Record every Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open, and there is someone waiting to take your calls. We can be reached on our toll-free number, which is 1-800-534-8255 or 949-8037, or also on 949-6990. And of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone and be heard over the radio, you can email us at fortherecord. That is one word, fortherecord at candw.ky. Now, you heard me say that this show is produced specifically for you and to keep you abreast of what's happening on the local, regional, and international scene. And there are always things happening on all of those fronts. But today we're going to be specifically discussing what's happening on the local scene, and we're going to be talking with Honorable Alden McLaughlin, our Premier. We will be talking about his press briefing that he had on Wednesday at 11 o'clock and his announcement of the government motion that is going to be brought to the Legislative Assembly on the 10th of this month, next Wednesday, relating to the issue of one man, one vote, or one person, one vote, and single-member constituencies. We know that this is important to you, not only those of you who support the concept and the introduction of one person, one vote in the Cayman Islands and single-member constituencies, but also those of you who are not in favor of it. And we want to ensure that both sides of the issue are heard and that you're able to freely express your views and your opinions. We have seen some of the headlines in the newspaper or the other stories in relation to it, and we have seen where cautious optimism for one man, one vote, and the two independent members who are also regular guests on this show have expressed their views on it. You've heard them express their views here on For the Record as well. So we will talk about that. But it is also important for us to point out that we want to walk you through the stages of the government's motion. We want to reintroduce you to the whole concept of the Electoral Boundaries Commission, what the Constitution says about it, what they're empowered to do, what the government can tell them or cannot tell them to do. We want to lead you through step by step through the whole process because it is important that you understand how the process works. And I would, of course, encourage you to read, if you have a hard copy of the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009, I would encourage you to read that, and in particular to read sections 88 and 89 in relation to the Electoral Boundaries Commission, because we hear people talking about the government should put this in the motion, the government should put that in the motion. But at the end of the day, we want to see what the Electoral Boundaries Commission is empowered under the Constitution to do, because that is where some of the recommendations will come from as well. We will also introduce you or reintroduce you to the Electoral Boundaries Commission that was established in 2010, their report of 2010. We will tell you who the members of that Electoral Boundaries Commission were. We will tell you the process of selecting, how those members of the Electoral Boundaries Commission are selected. And we can also talk about whether or not we should have those same members as the membership of the Electoral Boundaries Commissions. What are the pros and cons of having them there as opposed to having new members? We will talk about the role of the elections office, elections officials. We want to talk about the role of the Government Lands and Survey Department, the cartographers there, how they assist in helping us with the numbers, getting the addresses of people correct, because all of that is important in terms of putting you in the proper constituents that you should be in if and when the island is divided into single member constituencies. We know, for instance, that in the 2003 draft constitution order that was never implemented, that was never put into force, that there were recommendations then for us to have 17 single member constituencies. We know that there was, after that, there was a recommendation for 18 single member constituencies. Now we're hearing 19 being bantered around, and we'll talk about that as well. We have seen what the independent members have said in relation to that they're not really in support of adding any more than 18. There are pros and cons in relation to that as well, about having an even number and reducing the possibilities of having a hung legislature. I believe that by having an odd number, that reduces the possibility. It doesn't eliminate the fact that you can still have a hung legislature, but it removes one of those elements that would contribute to that. So we want to talk about that as well. We expect our premier to be in the studio at any point in time. Now, I'm sorry, not some point in time, at any point in time. But what I will do in the interim is to read, and I ask you to bear with me, to read the contents of the proposed government's motion that was introduced by the Premier on Wednesday. Some of you may have had the benefit of hearing that on the radio, but in the event that you did not, then I want to read that to you as well. But before we do that, we want to go to a commercial break. I want to remind you that For the Record is brought to you by Champion House Restaurant 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 is located on Eastern Avenue, and Champion House Cafe at 1 Butterfield Place, which is formerly the Comart Supermarket. Champion House, of course, is a family-oriented restaurant where locals and others dine. I want to also give a big shout-out to Paradise Coffee. Can't forget them, Paradise Coffee. They have provided us with a Keurig coffee and tea machine where our guests and staff of Radio Cayman as well can enjoy it. Only the other morning, the fresh aroma of coffee was really something to to inhale. Of course, I'm not a coffee drinker, so I didn't drink the coffee. I like my tea, my ginger tea. Tea is good and healthy for you. There are the pros and cons about coffee, whether or not it's good for you. But I'm a tea drinker. So we want to give a big shout out to them. So folks, it's going to be extremely exciting today. Interesting important to you, talking about one person, one vote. Like I said, for those of you who are in favor of one person, one vote and single member constituencies, as well as those of you who oppose it. And maybe the conversation will help to sway persons in one direction or the other. So please stay tuned. It's going to be extremely exciting this morning. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Oric Connor. And my guest in the studio with me this morning is the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. Mr. Premier, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, OC. Good morning to the listening public. It's good to be here. Had a nice shower this morning. Everything is nice and fresh and cool.
Yep, the Daybreakers this morning were on there from about 3-something debating whether or not they're going to go out. I think most of them wanted to go back to bed anyway, so the fact that it was lightning and thunder was an excuse for them to do that.
Yep. I stayed in myself because I knew I had to get up and be here for the show this morning and wanted to be fresh and not weary because you guys ride so hard these days that an old fellow like me is struggling to keep up.
Yep. Well, as a matter of fact, I was going to save this for later, but maybe I'll say it now. When one of the other talk shows yesterday morning, they were talking, I think when they were signing off, actually talking about the fact that they know that government has a schedule for them on Fridays, but they know that government has the ability to switch the guests who are going to be on, and they were hoping that you would be on the show, their show this morning, but they hadn't gotten a commitment from you after the press briefing on Wednesday. And I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm basically paraphrasing, but one of the hosts said, what other show would they want to be on, beside Rooster? What other show could be so exciting? Do they want to be on somewhere where things can be sugar coated and they can be handled with kid gloves? And I said to myself, well, when the Premier is on the bike with us, we don't handle him with kid gloves. He has to keep up with everyone else, and we'll hammer. And what For the Record is all about is really holding people accountable, not being confrontational, because our aim and our mission is really to empower the people of the Cayman Islands. We want them, and by empowering them, or in order to empower them, we have to give them information. We have to give them the knowledge that they need, and that is what this show is all about, not being confrontational. And when I have to be hard-nosed, I will be hard-nosed. But something on the issue and importance of one person, one vote, we need to talk to people. We need to educate them. We're going to only have basically 2 years to be able to do that before the next constitutional mandated election. So, we have very little time to do that. So there won't be any sugarcoating here, but we want to give you the facts. So we're going to treat the Premier the same way we treat him when we're out on the bike.
Well, for my part, I'm happy to go on either show. But I think most people recognize that, particularly with respect to the other show, there is at least one of the hosts there who, has, I shouldn't say has political ambitions. He's run in 2 elections, and he was and remains vehemently opposed to myself and the current administration. So when you go there is an agenda, and the agenda is not necessarily about getting out the facts or the truth. The agenda is about seeking to make the government look as bad as possible and to promote himself and the other party, of which he is still a member. So you have to take what is said and the questions that are asked and the positions that are taken in that context. I'm not averse to doing that because in the political field, I'm used to dealing with the opposition. So when I go on that show, I deal with it as though I'm dealing with the opposition. And I think most people recognize that.
Okay, so folks, we're going to have the phone lines open, but what I would ask you to do, if you could resist calling for maybe about 15 minutes or so, maybe after the 8 o'clock news break, because I want, I want to give the Premier an opportunity to first explain everything. And Premier, before I introduced you, said that I would read the order, but I believe the draft order. But I believe that
You mean the motion?
the motion, sorry, the draft motion. But I believe it is more appropriate for you to read it because you may want to interject at any point in time. Something on there.
I resisted reading it during the press conference, and I'd like to resist doing it now as well because the motion itself is in very legalistic terms, constitutional terms, because it needs to be. And I think for most people, that'll be a bit tedious to do that. But I mean, we can go through it and highlight it without reading it word for word.
Okay.
And I think the parts that really matter are actually what the motion seeks to ask the House to resolve to do, and then the basis for some of those proposals, particularly the establishment of the Electoral Boundary Commission and so forth, and the reference to the significant increase in voters since the last Electoral Boundary Commission report in 2010.
Okay, well, why don't we approach it that way?
Yeah,
then?
I think it's better that way than going through me reading for 5 minutes.
Right.
What is a rather legalistic document.
Okay, well, I'll throw it right over to you then, and you can just jump right into it.
Well, this issue about whether or not Cayman should adopt a different electoral system, and one based on what we call equality of franchise, equal, each voter having equal weight in the electoral process, has been around for many years. I think the first group of elected members to actually formally propose it was the People's Progressive Movement in 2002, the Progressives, and most people who were around then will remember that there was a very controversial period when the proposal for constitutional reform actually began. And in 2002, there was an attempt by the now leader of the opposition to force through a new set of constitutional changes, and there was great resistance locally because this was all being proposed to be done very quickly, and for there to be a change essentially in the leadership and the way the leadership was appointed right in the middle of a term. And most people felt that this is something that, if the changes are proposed, the electorate needs to have the opportunity to decide on those things at the next general election. And during that very controversial period, one of the things that was done was the development of what we call the parliamentary opposition's position paper on constitutional change. And one of the proposals from us was the introduction of a form of single-member electoral districts. The reason I say that is there was a special carve-out in that proposal for Cayman Brac, because the Brac at that point, the Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, felt that they did not want to be divided. The numbers of electors was small, and they felt that they might be at a disadvantage to have their two elected representatives, potentially one on either side of the parliamentary divide, i.e. one in the government and one in the opposition, and one in one electoral district and one in the other. So obviously that proposal didn't pan out. The constitution didn't change then. The constitution didn't actually change until 2009, when the country voted for the present constitution in a referendum in May of 2009, and this new constitution came into effect in November. So I say all of that by way of background because I've heard many times my detractors and the detractors of my party claim that we actually didn't support the move to single member electoral districts and equality of franchise, and that I've been described by the leader of the opposition as hypocritical and a liar and all sorts of uncomplimentary things because of the difficulty, I'll be honest, we've had in reaching consensus on how we introduce the concept of single member electoral districts in this administration. This is something that my party committed to in advance of the election and decided in our manifesto. But as I've said many times, my government is not made up just of progressive, and even among the progressives, there were and are those of us who have some reservations about the consequences of very, very small constituencies, and the ability, when the constituencies are so small, to manipulate the outcome, or to unduly influence the outcome of an election in a particular area. But and that is how we came up with the proposal, which I made in February in response to the motion brought by MLA Aaron McLean, of a combination of single member electoral districts and at large constituencies. But having thought about it long and hard and having looked very carefully at it, we've recognized, and we've had legal advice, that to be able to introduce the concept of at large constituencies, that is where every elector is able to vote for a number of persons who would sort of have broader representation and responsibility. That is for the entire country, into the entire electorate, rather than just to a particular electoral district. But to do that would require a constitutional change. Not a significant one, but one nonetheless. And of course, we don't have the ability locally to change our own constitution. We have to make representations to and persuade the UK government, the FCO first, and then the UK minister and his and the cabinet, because this has to be done by an order. It council by
and it would take considerable more time as well, which means that we would have less time for implementation.
Right. So we concluded, after a great deal of thought and care, that we should proceed, because this issue has been one that has been lagging for, well, now a decade really, and more than a decade, 12 years really. And so if we believe, I believed, and my team believed, that if we waited around, the chances are that it wouldn't happen again in this term either, because we do need the lead-in time, as you alluded to just now, to be able to prepare not just those of us who will run, but also those who will vote for this new system.
Yeah,
and
they're the most important ones. Yeah.
And so we've decided to move ahead. And as I said at the press conference, we believe that given the time that it took previous electoral boundary commissions to be able to produce a report, with 3 to 4 months, that we should be able to get this done by the end of June next year. Of course, it's difficult to give absolute guarantees, which is what I see my friends from East End and North Side are proposing, that we give some kind of ironclad guarantee. But parts of this are not within our control. Once you appoint the Electoral Boundary Commission, you can estimate what the time will be, but we're not in control of that process. And so I'm not in a position, the government is not in a position to give an absolute guarantee, but based on what transpired in the preparation of the previous 2 reports, we believe it is possible to get that report. Following that report, the Constitution requires that I, as Premier, have to take a draft order, which would be prepared by Her Excellency the Governor, based on the report. And the order would propose what are the changes that are going to be made.
And that would be decided mainly in cabinet as well, right?
Well, no. The Constitution requires that I take that draft order and the report. Okay, yes. To the Legislative Assembly in the form of a motion, and to indicate whether or not we the government, propose to accept that report as it's written and the order, or if there are changes that we propose to it, what those changes are. And then the entire House will vote on that. And so if the House adopts the order, either in the form that it is proposed or in a modified form, then that is the mandate to go ahead and effect the necessary changes to the elections law.
If we use the last Electoral Boundaries Commission report in 2010 as an example, we saw, for instance, that went to the Legislative Assembly, and what we ended up with at the end of the day with that was simply an increase in the membership in the districts of Georgetown and Bordentown.
Yeah.
That would be a classic example of what actually happened. So what was other things that were contained in that report were never affected at all.
No. And in fact, those three changes, the increase in membership was affected by the new constitution and not by that order. So the way that the motion is currently drafted, because there have been an increase of some 3,000 electors, voters, since the Electoral Boundary Commission report in 2010. That's a 20% increase in the electorate. The Electoral Boundary Commission needs to determine where those new voters are, where they reside, in determining where the boundaries ought to be drawn with respect to these proposed new electoral districts. Because at the moment, Cayman has 6 electoral districts. The 5 districts we know in Grand Cayman and Cayman Bracken and Little Cayman comprise the other. So there are 18 representatives currently. So it'll be really for the Electoral Boundary Commission to determine where the lines are drawn with respect to the electoral districts, and in accordance with their constitutional mandate, to recommend whether they think there ought to be another electoral district or another representative. That is within their constitutional remit.
Right.
And I see my friends again from East End and North Side are saying that the motion should say that it can only be 18. Well, that would be us unconstitutional in my view, trying to dictate to the Electoral Boundary Commission what their recommendation should say. Now, the House does not have to accept the recommendations of the report,
right,
but we can't so try to restrict what the Electoral Boundary Commission may recommend. That would be entirely unconstitutional.
Right, and for our listening audience, what I'm going to do later on is to read some excerpts from the Constitution in relation to what the mandate of the Electoral Boundaries Commission is in relation to it, for them to really understand that at the end of the day, it is their decisions that will be made, and whether, like you said, the government accepts it or not.
It's, as I said, I mean, their job is to make recommendations in the report. It is then a matter for the government and ultimately for the House to decide what of those recommendations it accepts or doesn't accept.
Okay, we're going to go to the news break at this point in time, folks. I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Orrit Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning is the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands, and we're talking about the proposed government motion that will be introduced into the House on Wednesday in relation to one person, one vote and single member constituencies. Please stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Orrit Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning is the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. We're here discussing the government motion on single member districts and one man, one vote. Before we went to the news break, we were talking about the Electoral Boundaries Commission, and I just want to point out to you that the Electoral Boundaries Commission provisions are made in Section 88 and 89 of the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009 in relation to the establishment of Electoral Boundaries Commission. And we pointed out that there was an Electoral Boundaries Commission that was established in 2010, and that there was a subsequent report that was laid in the table of the Legislative Assembly, but the recommendations there were not accepted. Just want to point out to you that under Section 88, the chairman of the Electoral Boundaries Commission is appointed by the governor, acting in his or her discretion. And in the case of the 2010 Electoral Boundaries Commission, the chairman was Mr. Carl Dundust, a renowned expert on electoral issues, not only in the Caribbean but in the Commonwealth as a whole. One member appointed by the governor acting in accordance with the advice of the premier. And I want you to pay extra attention to the words there, acting in accordance with the advice of the premier. Not acting after consultation with him, but in accordance with the advice. So the premier will advise the governor as to whom, the person whom he wants to be appointed as his appointee. So the governor should act and must act on that. One member appointed by the governor acting in accordance with the advice of the leader of the opposition. And again, the same thing applies, acting on the advice, not acting after consultation with. In the case of 2010, Mr. Norman Borden was appointed as a member, and Ms. Adrienne Webb was also appointed as a member. Now, what we need to consider, and what should be considered, that if we want this Electoral Boundaries Commission's work to be efficient, we have people who are already familiar with the process, who were appointed by the governor, leader, the premier, and the leader of the opposition, respectively, whether or not those same individuals should be used. It makes it easier because they're more familiar with the process, and things can certainly work much faster as well. So that is one thing that's been thrown out that I'll throw out to you, and the premier, if he wishes, can respond to that as well. And we also want to take a look at what are the terms and conditions of Electoral Boundaries Commission. And I should also point out that if a person is a public officer or a member of the Legislative Assembly, they cannot be appointed as members of the Electoral Boundaries Commission. So, that eliminates legislators, members of the Legislative Assembly, and the public servants. The Electoral Boundaries Commission, Section 88(6), may regulate its own procedure and, with the consent of the governor, confer powers and impose duties on any public officer on any authority of the government for the purpose of discharging their functions. And we saw where they used people from the elections office as well as from the lands and survey to assist them in their process. For the purpose of the discharge of its functions, the Electoral Boundaries Commission shall invite views. They must invite views from members of the public and may seek the advice as it considers appropriate. And it also points out that withstanding any vacancy or any member being absent, that they can still conduct their business, but there has to be at least 2 members of the commission there when that is done. Okay? An Electoral Boundaries Commission shall, as soon as practicable after the appointment, review the boundaries of the electoral districts into which the Cayman Islands are divided, and taking into account the changes proposed. The changes or proposed changes. So changes can be proposed to the Electoral Boundaries Commission, if any, in the number of electoral districts or of elected members of the Legislative Assembly, and shall submit a report to the governor and the Legislative Assembly containing its recommendations for any changes in the number and boundaries of electoral districts. So they can look into the number of electoral districts, and they can also look into the number of elected members of the Legislative Assembly as well. And in preparing its report under this section of the Constitution, this is extremely important again, listeners, they shall take no account of the racial distribution of electors within the Cayman Islands. Take into account the natural boundaries within the Cayman Islands, so they can take that into account. They can have regard to existing electoral districts, and we heard some talk about that, whether or not East End and North Side needs to be, combined because of the numbers, small numbers, 500 and odd in each one, and whether or not that should be the case. But they can take into account the existing electoral districts as well. And subject to the following provisions of this subsection, ensure that as so far as reasonable, practicable, across all electoral districts, there will be an equal ratio between the number of elected members of the Legislative Assembly representing each electoral district and the number of persons qualified to be registered as electors under Section 90 of in that district. But Cayman Brac and Little Cayman shall, between these two islands at all times, return at least 2 members of the Legislative Assembly. And you've heard me talk, previously about the carve-out that has been in place for Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, and that will remain as well. So Section 89 lays out exactly what the Electoral Boundaries Commission can take into account in their determination. They must obtain the views of the public, and they shall not have any regard to the racial distribution of electors in the Cayman Islands. They must take into account the natural boundaries within the Cayman Islands. They must have regard to existing electoral districts as well. Premier, before I get you to add further to that and to respond, I'm told we have one caller on the line, so we're going to take that caller now. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Sir President. Good morning.
Morning.
Yes. I think at times people need to respect the authorities, and you all are doing a great job as the government, and people don't realize that you all goes through a lot of try to get things straightened up that was needed being straightened up before, and through that, people don't know what individuals are facing. So they just tries to put things their own way instead of seeking the right ways of life. And I think that is very terrible for people to discriminate our government for their good efforts that they are trying to help with the community and the nation.
So you think that members of the Legislative Assembly should be working more closely with each other, and their examples in terms of showing collaboration and cooperation, that will actually spread and affect people as well, and people will act the same way, so that the members of the Legislative Assembly should be setting the example?
Yes, I think they are setting a good example by putting their efforts to help. But through they are doing that, the enemy doesn't like to see the progress and the development that you all are doing for the community and for helping those who are in need.
Well, thank you very much for that, because I said often, I said, even a stop clock is right twice a day. So everything the government proposes can't be bad, can't be wrong. But sometimes if you listen to what is said on the talk shows and what you read in the paper and what you hear the opposition say, you think that Cayman was really the worst place in the world.
And we are the blessed nation.
I think we are a blessed nation.
And
yes.
God has been good to us, and people people doesn't reverence God and doesn't respect God's God's church, and at times they just try to make discrimination against true-hearted Christians who are praying for the nation and praying for our government and pray that that God will continue to bless, because I have met people that come from the ship. I was talking up to yesterday to a minister, and the man said to me, he said, "Are you a minister?" He said, "What kind of work you do?" I said, "Well, I do, missionary work. I distribute gospel literature, and I place for the seniors at the Pines and stuff like that." And he said, it's such a beautiful island here, and the hospitality that has been shown to here in the Cayman Islands, that in some other countries the people are not sociable with other people.
Okay, caller, thank you very much for those.
Well, I want to thank you for your prayers. Continue to do so, and I want to thank you for your words of encouragement. You don't get that too often, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. We have another two more callers online, so we're going to take those callers now. Caller, good morning, and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you, Mr. O.C.
Morning, sir. How are you?
Just fine, thank you. Good morning to the Honorable Premier, Mr. McLaughlin.
Good morning, Mr. Hurlston. How are you?
Just fine, sir. I must congratulate you on making your campaign promise to come to life. It's a very important decision, and of course, a very strong-willed decision also, as we know. There is a lot of pros and cons here, and it's a very, because elections are decisions affecting the way elections are going to be held. It's very, very important, because most people just think of it the emotional way, but they don't think of the reality that the elected representatives are the only real voice that people have, and that's the only reason why we have elections, that the people may have a collective voice to represent them and their needs and their issues, social, economic, or otherwise. And as you were saying a while ago, elected representatives often take blame wrongfully, because there is always the focus that everything that goes wrong in a country is to be blamed on the elected representatives, when in a country like ours, where the private sector is so very, very powerful, they would like us to focus our attention on the little slip-ups that elected officials may make, or elected representatives, instead of focusing on what is happening in the private sector. And I wish we would sometimes focus on that a lot more. With this Boundaries Commission, are we then to expect that there will be a review and revisions and make new boundaries before every election, or every 10 years, or every 8 years, instead of saying, well, this is it for now, the next time we'll do this will be 50 years' time? Or because we did one recently, and I just have a problem with that. What are we going to do? Keep redefining boundaries? Are we cutting up the little places into different situations where this person who was in this boundary last election in this constituency will now find that they are not, but that it's shifted halfway in the middle of the road or something like this?
Yeah, caller, I don't think that our population growth is to that extent that it'll require constant change, and I believe that every 8 years is when the Electoral Boundaries Commission should meet normally.
Actually, the commission is essentially required to meet whenever there are significant changes. What's happened between 2010 and now is quite phenomenal.
4 years.
It's a 20% increase in the number of registered voters, and of course, since one of the mandates is to seek as far as possible to keep the number of voters in each electoral district roughly equal. If the Electoral Boundary Commission needs to know where those new voters are, because otherwise you could wind up with with an electoral district that has 1,500 registered voters and one right next door to it that has 800 or 900. So that is the reason why we have determined ourselves and taken legal advice on this and discussed it with the governor.
I understand
that we need to know where these new registered voters, there are 3,000 of them, what is the distribution, where they are, and that will determine in large part where the boundaries actually are drawn, because they will try as far as possible to keep the numbers, roughly equal.
And caller, there likely to be more than that too. Now, one of the things that I think that the elections office needs to look at now is to have make a concerted effort now to get people registered again before this takes place. I think there should be a blitz out there in terms of registration, so we get to capture as many as possible who are qualified to be registered and who want to be registered, so that we get a realistic as realistic as possible a figure.
But I can understand that, but I mean, there has to be some finality to this. I mean,
No, Mr. Hurlston. If you look at the way these things work everywhere else, this is a rolling process, because the number of electors, people move, new people qualify. In our case, since the election, this is one of the things that has me a little puzzled, but we've checked it and it is the case. The number of registered voters has actually dropped by 192 since May of last year. So these things happen, and in order, if the objective is equality of franchise, and that your vote is worth the same as my vote, you can't have districts that are significantly different from each other in terms of the number of people who vote. That we already are going to have that difficulty or that issue with respect to East End and North Side and Cayman Rock. But there's nothing that we can really do about that. I mean, those are distinct historical districts that have existed for a long time.
Right.
But to have in Bordentown and Georgetown and West Bay contiguous electoral districts, where, for instance, the boundary is at Sports Newlands here, and then the next boundary is down at Crew Road, and one district has in 1,500 registered voters and the next one has in 800 or 900, is something you want to try to avoid.
And while it is something that may seem to be repetitive, it is not a difficult exercise once you get things established, and that is why, for instance, having house numbers and block and parcel numbers and things of that nature, and area codes and stuff like that are going to assist in this, because it makes the job much easier. And Lands and Survey has a fantastic system there that enables the commissioners and their staff to be able to get this done.
Yeah, they certainly do. But what about the human aspect of it? We have to think. This is why we're doing this. There are people, the people are going to be there at the meetings. We know that it was abysmally low turnouts, because I went a few in 2010, and it didn't represent 1/100th of the people I would see sometimes, or even 1/20th or 1/40th elected representatives. Are they going to go to and hold meetings in the constituencies that were set out by those boundaries then, or that's to be totally disregarded? In other words, will the meetings be held like West Bay? It was to have been divided into 4 constituencies. What they said in that 2010 thing is erroneous. It no longer exists. Or are they going to hold the meetings in those constituencies and say, well, this is where you were supposed to have been in the election if it had come out as single-member constituencies? And what do you think of moving this boundary here or there? Is that the kind of format, or it's just going to be they're going to hold it in the town hall in West Bay or in Bordentown, Georgetown, the same thing, and say, well, this is.
It's going to be difficult for us to preempt what the Electoral Boundaries Commission will do, but I think you would expect that they're going to be based. They're not going to want to make any assumptions, and that it will be based on the current electoral districts that we have.
Right. Well, I mean, OC is absolutely right. We can't speculate too much really about what the Electoral Boundary Commission will do and how it plans to do it. That's a matter for them. But I think that we've had 2 reports now, and the last report in 2010 I think will form a very solid basis for the work of the new commission, because they actually produced a schedule with the boundaries, having divided the Cayman Islands into 18 electoral districts. So there's a basis there already to go ahead, and I think what they will probably do is they will go through the exercise now and have the technical people look at where these new voters are, and on the basis of that and the discussions in the districts, will then start plotting where people are, where the boundaries ought to be drawn.
It's just one final question.
Yeah, if you can make it real quick, caller, because we have the queued up, and then we're going to go for commercial break.
Just this. Is it that what you plan or hope to achieve is that a parliamentarian or representatives will say, if you're Georgetown South, Georgetown East, Georgetown West, the same thing with West Bay, that you are responsible for that area, and if the person from the other constituency comes to and say, can you say, no, I'm sorry, go to that guy over there. Is this what we're trying to achieve? I just would like to know some definitive answer to that.
Well,
thank you very much. Have an excellent day.
Thank you very much, caller.
Well, that is one of the downsides of these smaller districts.
But if you're a smart politician, you wouldn't do that.
You wouldn't do that. And there is this. I hesitate to call it this, but it's what it is, the fallacy that somehow moving to single member electoral districts is going to destroy the party system and give independent members a greater chance, or independent candidates a greater chance. I have spent a lot of time looking at this over the last dozen years or so, and I can tell you, with no exception, in every country that single member constituencies have been introduced, it has entrenched the party system, and it has also created a situation where there are always 2 dominant parties. And in most instances, those 2 parties control government for extended periods of time. Occasionally, you wind up with situations like you now have in the UK, where neither party actually could achieve a complete majority, so you wound up with a coalition of 2 parties to be able to form the government.
Okay.
But that's the way it is. I mean, we believe we have a mandate for this move. It's been talked about a long time. We've campaigned on this basis. There was a referendum held, although the results of that cannot be considered definitive because there was such a poor turnout. But those who did turn out voted in favor of it. And we've been elected on the basis of a manifesto that has promised the introduction of this. We've talked long and hard about it, and as I said, and I haven't been hesitant about that, there are those of us on our side that have certain reservations about it. But we believe, on balance, that we should go ahead. There's no system that is perfect.
We have to take a break at this time. I'm told that we have several callers on the line. Callers, I'm going to ask you to be extremely patient with us. We're going to get to you. Please stay there. We have to take a quick break, and we will be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning is the Honourable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. We're discussing the government motion to be tabled in the Legislative Assembly in relation to single-member districts and one man, one vote. We have callers lined up. Callers, we're going to ask you to be as brief as possible in your comments. We normally don't limit the amount of time that we give you, but we want to restrict it to about 2 minutes so that you can ask your question and then listen to your answer. So caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. O'Connor, and good morning, the Honorable Premier.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Amjad. How are you?
I'm all right, Mr. Premier. It's good to hear your voice in the radio. And always, when you come to the radio, you set record straight, and that's something good. My really concern about this election issue, I think I am against one man, one vote, as you know. And I think it is not good for Caymanian people to have, in a small country, to have one man, one vote. I think I come from a country, we use multiple vote, which is national vote. And I think in Cayman, for the future, it is very dangerous for Caymanian people to have. I give you example.
Mm-hmm. But your country, you have a national vote, but you end up with the same party being elected every election.
No, not. Listen, we have a very free democratic election, and we have very strong opposition in Jordan, and we have very, very good democracy.
Okay.
We're different from all Arab countries around us. But why it is danger for Caymanian people to have one man, one vote? I will give you example. If I start by I am Arab, I am Muslim. We have over 300 votes in Georgetown as Muslims. If we decided all, gather together, decided all, for example, to put in one area a candidate, he will win by 300 votes some areas. I'm not saying in Pacific in Georgetown, but I'm just giving you example. If tomorrow 300 Filipinos, they become Caymanians, they will gather together and put a Filipino in the house, sitting next to Izzard Miller and Arden McLean. Is that going to be good for Caymanian people? I think it is not right for the Caymanian people to take that approach.
But caller, if you listened earlier, we talked about the fact that what the Constitution says about not having any regard for the racial composition of an electoral district as well.
Yeah, but you see, look, I am not saying in race or whoever come from which country but you have always to think about your own people, because the Caymanian people who built this country and who have the rights more than anyone. I always defend the right of the Caymanian people in jobs, in anything the Caymanian people have rights in.
Okay, what you've said is in relation to single-member constituencies. What are your views in relation to one person or one elector or one man, one vote? What are your views in relation to that?
This is a different thing. When you have one vote in your district, it's not a bad thing. But the problem is to make small constituencies here and there. Look at North Side and East End. That is if you sit down 600 years, you will see the same MLAs coming out of that district, because the amount of it is limit the opportunity for other people to win the seat. That is why this is gonna make garrison politics. People will call you, tell you, "Oh, you coming to be candidate in my own district." They start call North Side and East End my district.
But voter caller, again, we have situations where when you look at, for instance, Mr. Tibbetts, he resides in Bordentown, but he runs in Georgetown. So we don't have those kind of garrison politics now, because people are free to go and become candidates in any district that they want. The smart politician will go to the district where he feels he has the best chance of winning. So if you know that you don't have a chance of winning in Northside, you don't go there and run as a candidate.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm going to ask you to leave us there because we have other people queued up. But if you can certainly feel free to call us back and we can continue the conversation. Next caller, please. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Morning.
Morning, Mr. Connor, Mr. McLaughlin.
Morning, sir.
Morning, Mr. Tibbetts.
I see nobody seems to even remember that I'm so recognizable. Even me don't remember that.
No, I'm good with voices.
I've been waiting so long that I even forgot what I wanted to say.
Oh, my. Sorry about that.
Anyway, two things. I heard Mr. Hurlson on there earlier, and as you know, I've lived in other countries, but in particular, one of our neighbors, and this, I'm not sure that the one man, one vote thing was there, but I know that the single member constituencies, and I'm not sure that I agree with having these electoral boundaries, well, probably just looked at, but certainly not changed every 8 years, because, and I don't agree with the numbering of voters in each district, because one small district might have 600 and the other one only have 160. And if you have 20% increase in population, it might be in that other one. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't think it should be relevant to the amount of people who live in that constituency, in the sense that if Cayman is divided into 18 sections, it should remain that way until some kind of commission deems it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that that based on our population growth and the trends, that you won't see any increases in the number of electoral districts that often.
Yeah, so I mean, while the Constitution might say it needs to be reviewed every 8 years and all that, I think that can be done without even telling the people. I mean,
But the thing is,
the other question. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to quickly address that point. What is when we talk about it being reviewed, and they're talking about adjusting the boundaries, not necessarily increasing the number of electoral districts, but to avoid the scenario that you just spoke to, where there's one district that has 165. I think it'll be more now, but has a small number.
Well, that was just a hypothetical.
Right, but 165, and another that has 350, because then your vote is worth more than mine, and it is easier for you to get elected if you are a candidate.
Yeah, but for any voter to think that way before he votes is ludicrous.
No,
anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but no, I don't want to. It's your turn to talk. I can talk afterwards. I just wanted to make that point. Go ahead.
Well, I might be a little bit naive because I haven't really been following up this thing, and to be quite honest, as an individual, I'm not sure that I'm convinced that one man, one vote is the best thing for this country. However, if it goes through, then fine. I will adhere to it. What I would like to know is that from you, Mr. McLaughlin, why this sudden change? Because I know that you all campaigned on this being a priority, and then for months and months, every time that somebody brought it up, you say, oh, it doesn't. And in one sense, I agree, because it's not going to happen until the next election anyhow. So if it was left until the last year, it was fine. But I'm wondering why all of a sudden. Unfortunately, I had an appointment and I didn't get to hear the press conference that you had. So I don't know what the reasons were. Can you enlighten me, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Well, you're right. It was not a priority of ours, because we felt the priority was the economy and getting people back to work and getting government finances and so forth back in order, and getting the reputation in the Cayman Islands back to where it needed to be, and improving the relationship with the UK. Those were really the priorities when we took office. But the opposition, in particular, the members from East End and North Side, have been hammering this issue from the beginning. They brought a motion already, and they filed another motion again. So it is a constant source of distraction for the government to be having to deal with this. from our party standpoint, the Progressives, it is something that we committed to do in our manifesto, and therefore, and we've been elected, and so we believe we have a mandate to do it. And so, my challenge and part of the burden of leadership was to get the entire government, the entire caucus, including the speaker from Cayman, to a point where all of us could agree on how we go about implementing the principle of equality of franchise and single member electoral districts. There was never any question among any of us about the need or the appropriateness of having equality of franchise. It was a question of how we do it, and hence the earlier proposal about a combination of single member electoral districts and at large constituencies and so forth. But I'll step up and say this. I took the position with my government that, listen, we have to make a decision about this. I expressed previously, about 2 months ago, my pessimism that we would be able to achieve this in this term because I couldn't get consensus. But I told them we are going to have to make a decision. It's either we're going to go with this or we're not going to go with this. I can't, and we ought not to be having every 6 months to deal with a motion from the opposition about this because the government can't take a position. We need to decide what the position is and get the issue behind us so we can focus on the things that matter to the average person. You know, the cost of living, jobs, opportunities for them and for their children, and education, and the situation with crime, etc. Those are the things that matter to the average person day to day. This is this is part of the electoral infrastructure which needs to be in place so that you have good governance and so forth. But it ought not to be something that I and my government have to be worrying about every 6 months. What are we going to do about this?
And the fact that you have the numbers in the Legislative Assembly as well
to make the decision.
You know, to make it. And we see, for instance, if you use Trinidad as an example, did it extremely quickly, passed in their parliament, went to their Senate, approval in the Senate as well.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, as I've said before, there are some of us who have reservations about this, but on balance, we believe that this is the way to go. There is no perfect system, and you know, I'll tell you, from me personally, I am closer to retirement from politics than I am to the start. At this point in my career, I really don't focus and don't worry about whether I win a seat the next election. My burden, my consideration always is what is best for Cayman, and what is going to help to take Cayman forward. And I think that when you think about the importance of each elector having the same influence over the outcome of the election and who the government is, that has to be the way to go. I mean, it's just not right that those of us who live in Georgetown get to vote 6 times, and those who live in East End and North Side only get to vote once. You know.
Caller, any final points?
Yeah. Final thing. I'd like to say. I mean, we're all each individuals, and we have different opinions. It would have been my humble opinion, and still is, that if this had been dealt with initially, it would have been all over. So rather than prolonging it and having all these people against and who and a lot of things on the talk shows, that could have been avoided. In my humble opinion, I would have dealt with it differently. But you're your own person, so.
Well,
but I'm glad to know that it's being dealt with now.
All right, thank you, caller. Thank you for those points.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. You too.
Well, my just final comment about that is, part of the burden of leadership, as I call it a burden, is that you've got to take the people you lead with you. I am the premier, yes, but I'm only the premier because I command the support of the majority. I hope all of them of the team I lead. I have to take their views very much into consideration, and a big part of it, I strive for consensus. It's not always possible to get consensus, but I really will not allow any one issue to cause major friction within my government, so that we can't get the key things we need done. There's no issue save that of if there are integrity issues. I promise you, I'll fire whoever it is immediately, even if it means that I have to go too. But anything short of that, we need to sit down and work through these things. And if we can't reach consensus in it, then we don't do it.
Yep.
Because otherwise, I wind up with a government that has people that are alienated, and I can't get the key things that the country needs done.
Yep. There's nothing like leading the band, and when you look behind, there's nobody behind you. We still have one caller, and caller, I'm going to ask you to be extremely patient with us. Thank you. We have to take a quick news break, and we'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to take the caller that's on the line now. Please stay tuned. You're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorit Connor, and my guest in the studio with me this morning is the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. Morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning is the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, Premier of the Cayman Islands. We have 4 callers on the line. Caller, we're going to go to the first caller. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record, and thanks for being so patient.
Good morning, C.
Good morning.
Good morning, the Premier.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. And I call to my purpose in calling is to congratulate you on your timing of this one man, one vote. I think you knocked the winner, the sales of many who would just keep this going on and on and on and disrupting everything else. It's not the cure-all, but it is the fair, only fair way of election that one man have his vote will count as much as the other. But I realized that you saw the setbacks that it would bring when you said it wasn't a priority. And I would say that even now, but thank you for your smart move.
Well, thank you for saying that, and you're absolutely right. As I've said before, I just couldn't have this hanging around,
Right.
interminably, and every time we start make some progress in something, there's a major distraction.
Right.
So we're going to put it to bed, I hope by Thursday next
Right.
week.
Thank you very much, Roops, for that. Thank you, and you have a great day, and I hope the family is all well.
And to you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next caller, please. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
The devil himself.
OC and the Premier.
Morning, Mr. Ivan.
Morning. How are you?
How are you doing?
All right, I thank you, Mr. Premier, for taking my place this morning because OC gave me the opposition place, but you jumped in and out. So thank you very much for that.
No, I got quite enough opposition. I don't need you too. I want you on my side.
No, I know, but I say I had no doubts about you bring this in before next election. I never had no doubts of that. And I know you had more important things to deal with before this. So I used to defend you when I hear people saying that you were not going to bring it in. But I know you had time to do it. You were the first one of the first ones that brought this subject up.
Yeah.
One man, one vote. You brought it way up 12 years ago. I remember all of that.
Yeah, and there are those, like my friends in East End and North Side who and the leader of the opposition who keeps saying I don't support it because I was worried about my seat. I tell them to go look at the results of the elections in the last 4 years in Georgetown and ask themselves if they think that Alden McLaughlin cannot win a seat in a single member constituency in the district of Georgetown. There are no guarantees, but I can tell you this: I have as good chance as anybody else I see there.
I know that. So, even to me, after I got it last time, I already had my running shoes out. But this time, I don't think I can fool with it. But I'm glad you put it to rest for one time. And to the listening public, some people think you got to put on a fence or a wall. That's not true. They do that on the voters list.
Mm-hmm.
They even made us believe, or try to make some of us believe that, to get divide us with a fence or wall. That's how far they went. But it's not like that. OC can explain to you how that thing is done. It'd be on a voters list, not a fence or wall.
That's right.
And we should be you should have to spend a load of money again now on educating us about it, because the money spent the last time. But how did we get an education? No. We were told that vote no to it, that education we got. Okay? I don't want to take up no time because you had people there for 2 minutes, but I know how hard it is to do it in 2 minutes.
Yeah, you've been in the seat, so you know how it is.
So you all have a good day now, and thanks for putting it through, OC.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you very much, and we hope to see you next week. To start talking again about seamen in the Cayman Islands and all of those early pioneers who assisted. Thank you very much, Mr. Ivan.
Okay, you all have a blessed day.
You too, sir. Thank you.
Next caller, please. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Mr. O'Connor, good morning, and good morning again.
Good morning. Good morning.
Premier. I have 2 questions.
Sure.
It's very important
Sure.
to give them to the Premier, because it's opportunity when Mr. McLaughlin in the radio is a very good opportunity to ask him some important questions.
That's what we're here for.
Right. The first question, the Honorable Premier know about the case. I know from sources that he meet with the family of Anna Evans. And I think, it is a very tragic that the salary of those family being stopped, as my information. And also those people in threat to be thrown in the road because they don't have a home now to live. What the Honorable Premier trying to do, if he can tell the general public about the family of Anna Evans who lose her, who been lost or been missed from the job site. The second question is, as you know, the Cuban immigrants, they come to Cayman. They're not seeking to stay in Cayman. They just seek to get some water, food, and leave our shores to go to United States. But I don't know why the police is threatening to arrest anyone. Us, the good people of this country, try to give those people food and water. I, been as a member of Amnesty International and other international human rights organizations, being contacted by Amnesty, they are investigating this matter, and this is against the international law, and they were going to give a bad name to Cayman. I think the Honorable Premier need to do something about this issue, because this is give us a bad name in the international thing. I will listen to the answers. Thank you, Honorable Premier, for coming to the radio to put us be informed. And I wish you and always a good health and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, caller. Thank you very much, Premier.
I really don't want to say very much about the situation with the family on Shedden Road. As Amjad has said, obviously we are doing everything we can on this end, and I have personally met with the family in relation to this, and I don't want to discuss their business over the radio. But it is important to note that there are 2 judgments, one of the Grand Court and one of the Court of Appeal, that are being acted on by the successful party in that matter, and with the assistance of the court officers and the police. And it would be wrong for me to say anything about the highest court in the land has ruled what they have ruled. What I am trying to do and what my government is trying to do is to offer all assistance that we possibly can to those who are adversely affected by this. And I know the families very, very, very well. I've been elected in the District of Georgetown for 14 years now, and so I am doing, and my government is doing what we can. But I don't want to get into discussions about the people's business on the radio. I think that's all I really want to say about that. On the other issue with respect to the Cuban migrants. This has always been a very emotive issue, and you know, human nature and our desire to be humanitarians causes us all to want to help people who are leaving, what is a pretty miserable existence for most of them, to try to make a better life somewhere else. The difficulty we have as a government is that there is a memorandum of understanding between the Cayman Islands government through the UK government with the Cuban government with respect to the repatriation of Cuban migrants who actually wind up staying in Cayman. If they keep moving along, we have nothing to do with it. It's when they and those that stay here almost inevitably are those whose craft, whose boats are not unseaworthy and incapable of continuing the journey, or occasionally people who are very ill. But the majority, the vast majority, the reason they stay here is because their boats are unsafe.
And we do see some who recognize the perils of being out there just between the 90-mile journey from Cuba to here, and they realize this is really not something that I should be doing, and that's why some of them voluntarily get off.
Right. So there are a number of reasons why we shouldn't provision them to carry on. One, we then take on a certain degree of responsibility, both morally and legally. If, as a result of our efforts, they then move on and they're lost at sea, their boat sinks or something happens, and they wind up, losing their lives. And secondly, given the policy with respect to Cuban migrants in the United States of America, we have to be very careful that we are not seen to be assisting.
We subscribe to the rule of law, and we have to
assisting persons to enter the United States, illegally. And those are the big considerations which the government has to have. And as I say, while it is human nature and all of us want to help and all of us feel a strong desire to assist people to make a better life for themselves, and the courage that they've demonstrated in leaving Cuba to try to go somewhere else, the government has to operate within the constraints that are there, and I think I've described them.
Okay, we have 4 callers on the line, and we have about 14 minutes, so we got to try to get all of them in. Otherwise, we have to go over time. That means we have to find a sponsor for the next 15 minutes. But we're going to take the next call. And our caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Morning, gentlemen. Number 1 from the Brook.
Morning, number 1. How are you?
Oh, I'm listening to you quite clearly.
Good.
That's good.
Right?
Yes, man. How are you?
I'm listening to you.
All right. Good.
But I got 2 questions for you. Is Cayman Block divided in 2?
Yes, sir.
Well, what if I live on the other side and the person I want to vote for is down west, and I don't think the one up east is fit for me? Is not taken away my right?
Well, no, you have the right to vote, but you can only
the right to vote, but not for the one you think is right.
You can only vote in the district that you are living in, which is the case now.
Well, Cayman Block is a district.
At the moment, it's 1 district. If this goes through, it'll be 2.
Well, I don't think that's right, because if I want to vote for you living down west or see up east, whichever one, and I don't think whichever one of you vice versa is not right, I want to vote there. That's my business. That's 1 district. Have your own vote in your district. Don't go tell you that you have to vote down the corner, east corner, north corner. No, sir. I don't agree with you. No disrespect, but I don't agree with that. And the second thing, I'm going to be quick. I heard you talking a while ago about every 6 months this people is bringing up this thing in the house about this and that. Don't make them 2 from the east frighten you, the east and the north.
They don't frighten me, sir.
Don't make them frighten you. What you got to do your work.
That's what I'm doing, sir.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, number 1.
Okay, bye.
Take care. Have a great weekend. Next caller, please. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Mr. Connor.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. So this is my
Well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope it isn't your last.
I guess not. And morning, Mr. Premier.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good.
First thing, I want to wish you a happy birthday and hope you have a good one tomorrow.
Somebody's got my secret. Thank you very much, ma'am.
The next thing, the other question I want to ask, or a comment more, I would say, is concerning the Cubans. I know we have this memorandum of understanding with, I guess, England and Cuba. But I think we should remember, too, that we were refugees, a long time ago. We went to Cuba, Isle of Pine, we went to the Islands, we went to Nicaragua, we went all about. I think, I hope something could be really worked out that we could assist the Cubans with, at least be humane to them and give them water and, let them go on if they don't want really to stay here. So that's really all I wanted to say.
Okay.
Well,
thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you. Well, I think I explained earlier why while I understand all of that, and it is the natural human reaction. The difficulty is inherent in helping people in many instances go on to what is pretty much certain death. In watercraft that is just completely unseaworthy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give one analogy. You have a house, you have home insurance, for there, and your next door neighbor, who's your best friend, comes over, and for some reason you decided you neglected picking up that banana peel that was dropped on the floor, and that person slips on it. Later on, they're your best friend, they're your neighbor, but they sue you because they have incurred pain and suffering and expenses as a result of their injury that they have incurred in your house. And you say to yourself, that's my best friend and they're suing me. And I thought they were my friend all along. But when this has happened, and that's the same thing happened, or you have family members over in the United States, Florida, and about, they're saying, we want you to assist them, and condemning the Cayman Islands government for what we do. And the first time and I hope it never happens, but the first time there is an incident at sea where there is loss of life, and it is as a result of us assisting them, then we're going to see the lawsuits raining down in the Cayman Islands. We just, in yesterday's paper, we saw the incidents where one of the vessels drifted up on the rocks and stuff like that. That is just a precursor of a reminder of what could possibly happen. Let's take the next caller. Caller, good morning and welcome to For the Record.
Good morning again, gentlemen.
Morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
The cold hard truth is, of course, that we cannot be seen to be helping people to illegally migrate. I think that's one of the big issues why we have.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You couldn't. Just another country.
You're absolutely right.
Good. Just two questions. With the splitting it up into different constituencies, the multi-member districts now, would we have to be reissued new voters registration cards in many instances before the next elections?
I would think. I would. I'm really not qualified to speak to this, but I would think so.
I'm certain. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so.
Because I think it's important that everyone who is a voter be in having their possession of voters registration card. In most countries, that is the most perfect means of ID, because many people don't have a driver's license, many people don't have a passport. It helps to identify them in every country as the best means of identification. They should not be able to go to the polls without it.
And it has to say also what the constituency that you're in, and you're right about the elections law. The elections law basically says that you should produce a elector's identification card when you're voting, and of course there are provisions if you don't have it.
The other question is this: you mentioned voter equality. If we were to take every district as it is now, 5, 6 districts it is, and give them each 3 members, and you have 3 votes, you can vote for 3 people. Wouldn't that be voter equality?
Yes.
And we wouldn't need to split it up. Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to hear an answer to that.
Yes, he's absolutely right.
That's right.
He's absolutely right.
That would put another equation into the mix. But we need to look at what is going to be practical. And I guess the difficulty is, and you're the politician, getting consensus on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'll be voter equality in one sense, but it won't be. It'll be voter equality, but it won't be representative equality, because you'd get districts like East End and North Side which are really overrepresented. Because with 600 registered voters, you got 3 representatives. So yeah. So there's, as I said, there's no perfect system.
Yep. There's none. We have another caller. Caller, good morning. Thanks for being so patient, and welcome to For the Record.
Oh, good morning to you, sir. Good morning to you, Mr. Connor, and also to Mr. McLaughlin.
Good morning.
And know that I've just learned you had a birthday. I hope that turns out to be really good. Nothing to be
not yet tomorrow. Not yet tomorrow.
Nothing to be afraid of there. Tomorrow. Okay. So anyway, if you don't have a birthday, you're not here anymore.
I tell you that.
So anyway, God bless you, and I hope that yours will be not only many more, but you will continue to be the fine representative for Cayman as you have been all along. And the longer you go, the more mature you're getting. And to be honest with you, sir, I quite frankly must say that I have no reservations. I am not disappointed. There are some things that I wish were done differently, but all of your efforts and everything that I have seen and heard and read and observed is that you are trying your best to be the best leader possible. And I'm not sure right now that is anyone. We have some very, very good people in the House, but I would hope it would have, but God would bless us, and we would be wise enough to, if it is His will and we're here, that we would give you another term there. But right now we've got to focus on this term, and so I understand that this is an issue which is not a top priority. I mean, I speak to people. I'm out there, almost every day something comes up about politics or what's happening in Cayman, and really, the one elector, one vote situation has never, not since you've been there, been a top priority, not in the wider audience. We from time to time on the talk shows and the issue comes up, but as you have so clearly stated, it has become a distraction. There are other things that you need to deal with, and so why have distractions? So if it's something that you can put to rest now and get moving on other issues, then I think that's the way to go. And for that reason, I congratulate you. And I hope that as you go along, many of the issues that we have to deal with, which are more important and certainly more urgent, that you will find finally be able to resolve some of those, or at least make the situations better, such as unemployment of Caymanians and some of the issues with the school, all of which I think you are making progress on. But for many who are hurting, it doesn't seem fast enough. So with that, I have one question regarding the one elector, one vote. If, say, I'm living in the Mount Pleasant area, but I wanted to actually stand as a candidate in the Northwest Point area, which is certainly the opposite direction almost, does one have to change one's residence in order to run as a candidate in another constituency, or can I just say I wanted to run, which I have no intention of, but could I actually run in Northwest Point, even though I'm living in Mount Pleasant?
The short answer is yes. Once you meet the qualifications to stand as a candidate, it doesn't matter which district. You're not restricted as to where you can stand. And the basis for that is, or the thinking behind that is that it's up to the voters to decide who they want as their representative. They want someone who lives in Northside to represent them in West Bay. That's a matter for the voter.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much, caller.
Thank you very much.
And you have a great weekend.
Thank you for taking my call. And looking forward to it. God bless. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Just for everyone's information, I just want you to know we've received a response from Mr. Wesley Howell, who is the supervisor of elections, and he says, I would like to share that the elections office is indeed seeking to execute a voter registration drive shortly to ensure the Electoral Boundaries Commission has the most accurate number to work with. This in association with the data from Lands and Survey and the Economic and Statistics Office should be very helpful to the Commission. So that is good to know, and that came directly from the Supervisor of Elections, Mr. Wesley Howell. Premier, you mentioned earlier about the two independent members and their press. I'm not sure that you mentioned the press briefing, but the challenges to you in relation to it.
I was referring to the report in today's paper.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's your view on that?
Well, I think they're searching really to find something to oppose. We have the motion will result in what they have been lobbying for the last probably 3-4 years in particular. So I really don't understand why they wouldn't support the motion, as they have threatened not to.
Okay, thanks for that. I just want to take this opportunity very quickly to, and again, I encourage the listening audience to go and take a look at the 2010 Electoral Boundaries report. If you really want to educate yourself, about the whole process, take a look at that. They have, in section 16, pointed out single-member districts / constituencies, the advantages and the disadvantages, and I'll highlight them to you. Advantages of a single-member district are as follows. They provide voters with strong constituency representation because each has a single district representative who is easily identifiable. They facilitate voters with a readily identifiable representative to whom concerns can be addressed. They maximize accountability, as a single representative can be held responsible and can be re-elected or defeated at the next election, and they ensure geographic representation. Some of the disadvantages: they must be redrawn on a regular basis to maintain populations of relative equal size. And you heard one of our callers, express his concern, about that, whether or not it has to be, at least, and the Premier has pointed out, you at least have to look at it to make sure that there isn't a wide discrepancy there. Another disadvantage: there are usually artificial geographic entities whose boundaries do not delineate clearly identifiable communities. And as a consequence, the entities may have no particular relevance to citizens. And what I'll say about that is that because of our size, the Cayman Islands, at the end of the day, all of our local politics become national is national politics. So, while yes, there are some things that may be restricted to particular electoral districts. One would be, for instance, the talk about the proposed fuel facility, whether or not it goes in one district or the other. That becomes, much more local. But then almost everything relates and has an effect on the whole island as well. And another point in terms of a disadvantage: they often do not produce proportional representation for political parties because their tendency to overrepresent the majority party underrepresent other parties, and you point out that dominance is there. So those are, and they have laid it out there. The Electoral Boundaries Commission wasn't just giving you and saying, here's what you should go with. They have shown you the advantages and the disadvantages as well. Premier?
Yeah. The only other point I think that I wanted to make today is that one of the considerations which the Boundary Commission, I think, probably should have regard to is this whole question of with 18 electoral districts, the distinct possibility of what's called a hung parliament. That is, that you wind up with equal numbers of persons on opposite sides. You know, when I think about the last election, where we won, the Progressives won 9 of the 18 seats, there was a distinct possibility that the independent members could have migrated over to the other side, and we would have wound up with a hung parliament. So the way that the motion is drafted, it is open to the commission to consider that and to think about it and make whatever recommendation there is. We certainly aren't making. We certainly aren't in the motion seeking an increase in the number of elected representatives, but we believe it should be left open to the commission to consider this in their discussions about the matter. With equal numbers in the House, you know, the chances of a hung parliament are significantly increased. You can, of course, have hung parliaments even when you have uneven numbers, because the results don't always, pan out neatly, where there's this number from this side and this number, equal numbers from that side. Just look at the last election here. You know, the Progressives won 9 seats, the UDP won 3 seats, and the rest were independents of a sort. Whether the two from North Side and East End can actually be considered independents is, and of course the other grouping were people who were under the banner of the C4C. So, but in any event, there were at least 3 and probably 4 groupings of people who were elected. So, having unequal numbers doesn't guarantee there won't be a hung parliament, but having equal numbers increases the chances that you might have that.
Yeah. And folks, you're hearing the Premier referring to a hung parliament, and while I know some of you would say, yeah, we need to hang some of those members of the Legislative Assembly, that we have what it means in terms of having equal numbers on both sides. But I just wanted to
and I should say the result of a hung parliament, as we've seen in Trinidad not so long ago,
yes,
is that you wind up having to run the election again. The
whole
thing
extremely
all
costly,
over again.
Yes, yeah. We got one caller, and Paul, we said that the caller wanted to know your reaction to, but I'm still not getting clarity as to what it was that was said at the press briefing yesterday between the 2 independent members in relation to it. I know the headline says cautiously optimistic, and you've pointed out the fact that, and we have looked at the Constitution and what it says in relation to the Boundaries Commission. So it's obvious that you can make in giving them their remit, you can make certain recommendations to them, or proposals. You can make proposals. You haven't proposed the number of electoral districts, and that was one of their criticisms.
Yeah, well, that's up to them. But as we've gone through, I think it borders on unconstitutional for us to say to them it has to be this number. The Constitution currently prescribes 18. So that's the number we're working with. But it's open to the Boundary Commission to say, well, we think it ought to be 19 or 18 is fine. But it's a matter for them. Whether the House accepts the recommendations is an entirely different matter. Right? But I don't think that we should be about trying to tie the hands of the Commission with respect to matters like that. If they don't comment on it, it'll be 18, because that's what the Constitution prescribes. If they decide it ought to be 19, then it's a matter for the House to decide whether or not they want to accept that recommendation or want to stay with what we have. The Boundary Commission doesn't make the decisions; they make recommendations.
One more question, and then I'm going to ask you. After that, we're going to take up a little bit more time. I'm going to ask you to just step by step for a listening audience. What the process will be now with the motion and each step. But I mentioned earlier about the composition of the previous Electoral Boundaries Commission in the form of Mr. Dundas, Mr. Norman Borden, and Ms. Adriana Webb. We know that it's going to be certainly the governor acting on his own
Her.
Or her own in relation to the chairperson of that commission. Your nominee, the in 2010 was Ms. Adriana Webb. Recognizing the fact that you don't make decisions yourselves unilaterally. You have to consult with your caucus or with your membership.
Right.
Would you be inclined, for the purpose of continuity, to keep the same member? And I know you can't speak for the leader of the opposition, but what would your inclination be?
Well, I think you answered it when you started. Is that I have to consult with my caucus and my colleagues. Miss Adriana was an outstanding representative. She served on both electoral boundary commissions in the past, because there was a previous one. I think it was 2003.
Right.
So I mean, I think she's eminently qualified and somebody that I entirely support. But I couldn't say that's what we would go with, because this is not an issue that we have actually discussed.
But the logic would point to
but
that.
The logic is very good. And Mr. Carl Dundas, I think we'd search in vain to find a better and more able individual in the Commonwealth, really.
And one who's familiar now with the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, whether he would want to do it again or whether the governor is comfortable with that is something I can't comment on. And obviously, Mr. Norman Borden is eminently qualified and huge experience politically, and eminently qualified to do the job. And I mean, he's somebody that I would have no difficulty at all supporting.
Okay.
But of course there are other people as well, who have experience locally in these matters and who would qualify. So I'm not closing the door to that, but as I'm saying, I think that the country has been well represented in the past with the people who have been on the Electoral Boundary Commission.
And of course, because they can regulate their own procedures as well, I don't see where there would be anything that would prevent them, for bringing people on in a in a consultation role as well. But now, if you could walk our listeners through the whole process.
Right. So the motion was filed on Tuesday, and the next meeting of the House will start on Wednesday. And one of the first pieces of business will be this government motion, which seeks to adopt the principle of one elector, one vote as the basis for the electoral system for the Cayman Islands, and the introduction of single member electoral districts. So I will move the motion, I will speak to the motion, and then every other member of the House will have an opportunity to speak if they so wish, and to debate the matter. When the debate is concluded, the House will vote and vote yes or no with respect to the motion. I expect the motion will carry. We have the majority of seats, and even if the members from East End and North Side don't support it, the leader of the opposition has already said he will not support it. It'll be interesting to see what the other two West Bay members, Mr. Bernie Bush and Captain Eugene Ebanks, say, because they actually voted in favor of the previous motion, which was brought by the member from East End, in favor of single member constituencies. So it'll be interesting to see where they go. But I fully expect that the motion will carry. When the motion carries, obviously one of the things one of the resolutions is that Her Excellency the Governor be invited, in accordance with Section 88 of the Constitution, to appoint an electoral boundary commission. So that'll be the next stage, and as you have pointed out, the Governor gets the opportunity to appoint the chairman, and then the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition each get to choose who the member should be, and then the commission will be appointed and convened, and they will start their work. And they will go through the exercise that you've spoken about. There'll be public meetings. They will obviously benefit from the work that is going to be undertaken with respect to registration of new voters, to make sure that the lists are as current as possible, so that they can have a better idea about where the lines are drawn. They will have to make some decisions about a range of things, including, whether they're whether we should go with the 18 or whether it ought to be another one, as an example, and where the boundaries ought to be drawn. And when they have completed their report, that report will be handed to Her Excellency the Governor, who will then have a draft order drawn up in accordance with what the report recommends, and that order will be given to me. Obviously, I would discuss that at length with my team, and I would bring the draft order either in the form that the Governor has drawn it, or with modifications if my team thinks that it ought to be modified. And I would bring that in the form of another motion to the House, and if there are modifications, I will make a statement about the reasons for the modifications, and then the motion will be voted on by the House. And if the motion is passed and the order with or without modifications has been accepted, then the Governor will publish a notice, an order, the final version of the order, and that will then delineate where the boundaries of the proposed electoral districts will be.
If I could interrupt for a second.
With respect to the next election.
The modifications, so there are two stages for modification. After you receive it and discuss it, and once it gets to the Legislative Assembly, is it possible for members of the legislature to modify and make modifications as well? And the reason that I ask for that is that you say, discuss it with your colleagues, whether or not it would be more prudent to include everyone in those discussions so that when you get to the Legislative Assembly, you have a document that is agreed on by everyone.
Well,
or at least most.
I don't hold out any hope at all of getting agreement from everyone, because I do believe that if I went down to the House and I suggested that salvation was boundless and free and available to all who wish to have it, there would be objection from the members from East End and North Side. So I don't hold out a great deal of hope of getting agreement from everyone. But I certainly would want to take into consideration the views that all members of the House have with respect to the draft order in deciding whether or not there ought to be modifications made to it and what they are.
Because there are those who openly oppose the whole idea, the whole concept,
right.
And you're not, whether or not you get something positive from them would be questionable.
Right. So once the Governor makes the order and publishes it, that will come into effect come into effect for the next elections with respect to the boundaries of the proposed electoral districts. Then what would be required would be amendments to the elections law to give effect, essentially the schedule of the which will be created for the boundaries of the new electoral districts would form part of the elections law. So as I've said before, our thinking is that 9 months, that is between now and the end of June next year, ought to be sufficient time for all of this to be done. But there are always the possibility that there are delays, unavoidable delays, or things that occur that none of us have contemplated, and hence the reason why I would hesitate to try to give some sort of ironclad guarantee. But given our collective experience, we think that 9 months should be adequate time to get all of this done and dusted and this put away, and the business of the country can go on. In the meantime, when all of this work is going on, we can get on and do many of the other things that we need to do. There are other amendments to the elections law that I believe need to be made, and not just me believe, but I know as supervisor of election for a number of years would know very well where improvements can be made, and so we'd be looking to make some of those changes probably at the same time.
As a matter of fact, one of the former candidates in West Bay sent me a text message the other day and pointed out that this would also be an opportune time to look at campaign financing, as well. If you're going to have single-member constituencies, of course, you still have the whole party system in place, but also whether or not we should be looking at campaign financing, which, despite the fact that we may go to single-member constituencies or single-member districts and one person, one vote, that the whole issue of campaign financing still needs to be addressed, whether or not those numbers that are allowed in terms of the dollar figures and stuff are sufficient, and how do we put some control in it that those candidates who are able to get big monies are not overwhelming those individual candidates who rely on little small individual contributions.
Well, one thing I'm absolutely certain of is, having been now involved in 6 election campaigns, 2 before I was elected, and I've done 4 terms, or by the end of this term I'll have done 4 terms. So 6 is that moving to single-member electoral districts is going to significantly increase the cost of election campaigns. Significantly. I would say probably double, at least double the cost of the election campaign.
Okay. We've gone way over, but I'm going to give you, Mr. Premier, an opportunity to say some final words, and whether or not you would have any final words for those persons who are eligible to be registered and are not registering. Any final words for them as well?
Well, the first thing I want to do, OC, is to compliment you for the show and the growing interest in the show. And I think demonstrated today by the number of calls that we've had. I mean, we've had very little time to discuss these things because of the interest that's been demonstrated. And I think that's very good. I think, for the record, is growing in leaps and bounds and in credibility, and a place where people can turn to learn what the facts are, what the issues are, free of the constant acrimony and an agenda, which is part and parcel of really the other show.
Thank you for that.
Right, and so I'm very pleased with the way this is turned out, and I'm very grateful to all of those who have called in today and demonstrated such interest in this critically important matter. And I do enjoy the back and forth, which is the part of any good talk show. I think that it's very useful to have a medium like this to be able to discuss issues like this, and no doubt over the course of the next few weeks, as the motion goes forward and is approved, there'll need to be further discussion as part of the education process. And as the supervisor of election has said, they're already mobilizing with respect to voter registration. And once the commission is appointed, there'll be more public meetings to talk about, how this process is going to take place and where the boundaries ought to be drawn and so forth. And I know that you will play, as a former supervisor of election and former cabinet secretary, you have intimate knowledge of these issues, and you will play a very important role in that overall education process. And this show, I'm sure, will again feature prominently in the government's efforts to make sure that the public understands this process. So I just want to take the opportunity again to thank all who have been listening to the show, and particularly those who have called in. I hope the discussions today have gone some way to help people understand what is being proposed. And I look forward to being back on the show in the very near future.
Thank you very much. And it is certainly the intention of us here on For the Record to ensure that the public gets the information that they need, the information that they want, anything that will help to clarify things for them, to make their decision making much easier, we will certainly be doing it here on For the Record. I want to thank our sponsors again for sponsoring our show. And of course, For the Record is brought to you by Champion House Restaurant 2 and Champion House Cafe. Champion House Restaurant 2 is located on Eastern Avenue, and Champion House Cafe at 1 Butterfield Place, formerly Comart. Champion House, of course, is a family-oriented restaurant where locals and others dine. We also want to thank Paradise Coffee for the nice, this morning we'll say tea, because that's what the Premier had, tea this morning. And of course the staff of Radio Cayman are enjoying the little refreshments as well in the form of the tea and the coffee. I again want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There are people who are less fortunate than we are. We have our neighbors, we have our friends. I encourage you to always hold out that helping hand to help those who are less fortunate than we are. And if you can't do that, then you should probably seek to donate to a worthy charity. And we always leave you with the words of Mr. Billy Withers. Lean on me. I say to you, have a great weekend, and rejoin us again on Monday morning at 7:30. Take care, and God bless.